Welcome to another episode of Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eurydice. I am Greek from the island of Lesbos. I am the author of Satyricon USA, published by Scribner, F32, The Second Coming, by Virago, F32. I wrote for years the Sex Files column in Spin Magazine, Gear Magazine. I'm the founder of the Institute for Self-Satisfaction. I'm an artist, performer. I have worked my entire career on these issues of sexuality, female sexuality, uniting soul and body, mind, and bringing together what has been broken up by patriarchy, religion, culture, in order to keep men and women divided. My guest today is Alexander Guldbeck. He's an artist, a Gnostic bishop, and he's a hypnotherapist who works specifically on survivors of sexual trauma. So he specializes in sexological hypnotherapy. So we'll hear all about that. And of course, we'll hear about his journey, how he got from Canada to being a bishop in the Gnostic church and practice sex hypnotherapy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Eurydice. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So introduce yourself a little bit to us and our listeners.
Okay, my name's Alex, and I moved here to Miami from the Bay Area about 3 years ago. And listening to that last interview, I was just thinking about how much I had to do with personal journeys and how people sort of become who they are. And let's see. There's so many things I could talk about. You know, I can.
So
the last radio interview I did, I
born
talked for
and
4 minutes.
raised in Canada, right?
Yeah.
And in a Catholic household.
No, actually, my parents were not Catholic. In
Okay.
Canada, there's a 2-tier school system. There's English secular and French Catholic.
Oh, okay.
And my parents wanted me to be bilingual, so kindergarten I walked in my first day, and just everything was in French, math, history, everything we did. And so it was just learning by total immersion. And the French school system in Canada is Catholic. So there was about an hour a day of religious instruction, which was odd to me. I mean, my father was Danish, and so I grew up listening to stories about Thor and Odin and all the Norse gods and their battles with the frost giants and troll hunting and all this sort of thing. Valhalla. I believed in that very strongly. I took it literally, as a kid will do.
Yeah.
So
that was your religion.
That was my religion. So I'd have maybe an hour a day of instruction in school, and we'd learn about the story of Job and all this sort of thing. And during lunch, I would, sit and chat with my friends and say, hey, I know you're being exposed to this misinformation. Here's what's actually happening. Is that,
That's way cooler.
The thunder god Thor has a chariot that's pulled by goats, and he, rides it around killing frost giants. And at night, he kills the goats and cooks them and eats them and buries their bones. And the next morning, they come alive again. And my friends were like, aha, that's great. Tell us another one. So what happened was a nun actually snuck up on me and overheard me telling my friends the story and literally grabbed me by the hair and dragged me to the office. And I was sent home, right? And,
you were a heretic.
Yeah, for being a heretic. I think I was maybe 7. I know I was 8 or 9 when this happened. So
you're such an overachiever.
Yeah. So at the time, my dad was dying of cancer. I mean, it took him about 2 years. He was sick for about 2 years. So I was really in a state of deep existential conflict, I think. And this Norse mythology, this religion, was basically this structured and ordered my reality. So being punished for this and sent home, and having that sort of yanked out from under me, really, whatever. I mean, this was a very formative event for the person that I turned into, because I'd never doubted that the things that I believed were true. I never doubted my own perspective. But after getting into that kind of trouble, I really didn't know what to do. So I used to go to the library every weekend. I'd spend all day. Just my parents said, hey, you can take out any book that's interesting to you. As long as you can read it, you're fine. So I read all kinds of weird adult anthropological and psychological material that most kids are not exposed to. And in that particular instance, I read a whole bunch of books about parapsychology and, cryptozoology and Bigfoot and ghosts and all this stuff. And I went right back into school and started proselytizing for the occult. And I got in trouble for that. And I was like, man, 2 strikes, you're out. And I just went on strike, and I did not speak in school for the rest of the year. It was a formative experience, and it sort of like gave me a...
Well, it takes a lot of willpower to not speak at that age.
I was incredibly stubborn,
Yeah,
Yeah.
But then, for the record, from where I'm standing, they martyred you. They were turning you, the Catholics, into, a martyr, and you were like, I'm not buying this concept of like Job being the weak one and God, Yahweh being out there to always punish us, and instead, my God empowers me, and
Sure.
I am, so that is huge. In the archetypal, way of thinking of
Sure.
it. That is a huge moment of like taking a stand. That doesn't really happen in our society. That's much more secular.
Sure.
Yeah, and it happened to you when you were super young.
It gave me a deep longing, I think, to make sense of the world that I live in and to try and understand who I am, right, in an authentic way. And since we're talking about personal experiences, right, so my father died. We moved to the U.S. when I was about 9, and in the summer, my little sister and I would go stay with my grandparents, and who lived in Long Island. And my grandfather was career military. He taught English at West Point. He was literally the first GI to be captured by the Nazis in the European theater, and was in a Nazi prisoner of war camp briefly. And he did not ever really discuss how it was that he came to leave that camp. But I'm pretty sure, some hard decisions were made.
He escaped.
Yeah, he escaped.
Did he? He escaped and made it back to Ally lines.
Yeah, he left basically of his own direction, and wound up.
Which is like bare hand style.
Yeah,
That's the tough stuff.
Tough stuff. Wound up in D-Day, liberation of Eastern Europe, and wound up being the Provost Marshal, so to speak, of Nuremberg during the Nuremberg trials. And was an ardent despiser of fascism, including what he saw as being fascism in the United States. Like, he had a tremendous sense of humor, and I remember making one year for Christmas, I gave him a rubber head of Ronald Reagan, just because he couldn't stand Reagan, and he built this enormous, elaborate wooden sculpture of himself. He was Scottish, of himself carrying a sword. Sort of standing over this head of Ronald Reagan, which was poking out of the bushes, and there was a quote on the front from Shakespeare that said, the beast knew not what mischief it did, out damn spot. And you could turn this crank on the side. And I mean, this thing was like 3 feet tall and 2 feet deep.
So he gave it a lot of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he's a master woodworker.
And you could turn this crank on the side, and my grandfather himself, as this wooden statue, would lean back with the sword, and as you continue to turn the crank, he'd bonk Reagan on the head with the sword.
Wow.
So that really influenced, I think, also my psyche and the way that I look at things.
Your sense
And my sense of humor, too, sure. And his experiences, as a POW, both coming into early conflict with the authorities of the Catholic Church at the age of 9, and just discovering that they didn't have the answers that I was looking for. And I think some amount of my grandfather's experience fighting the Nazis and really being traumatized and, in a sense, being put in a situation where he did not have the ability or the latitude to complain in a Nazi prisoner of war camp. Like, there's no complaint desk. You know what I mean? So, and that marked him for life, and he was traumatized by it, but didn't discuss it. And
but it's something that definitely affected your experience.
Yeah. So when I went to college, I studied European history, and I was really obsessed with European fascism, and my advisor was an expert on this, and he had sort of a psychosexual analysis of fascism, and that I was introduced to the theories of Wilhelm Reich, who was a disciple of Freud's, who pioneered what almost seems to be like a form of Western, sort of Western somatopsychic healing, because Reich's concept was that people have certain areas of, muscular tension or energetic stagnation in their bodies, and that these things form a kind of armor which both protect us and insulate us from having genuine experience of the life force. And he called it, body armor or character armor.
Mm-hmm.
And Reich believed that it was important to just address that in a very physical, tactile way and break up the body armor. And in this way, sort of release the person to have the fullest possible expression of their own life force.
Mm-hmm.
And that the split between mind and body is something that Wilhelm Reich called the emotional plague. And he believed that this was like an epidemic in Western society, and that when this went far enough unchecked, it would either produce cancer in individuals or fascism in societies. And he wrote all these books about, the function of the orgasm. And he basically, instead of calling it chi or prana or ache, he called it, orgone energy.
Oh, yeah, orgone
Yeah,
energy,
yeah,
So what
yeah.
is the function of the orgasm, please, for those who don't know?
Basically just to sort of heal the split between the mind and the body, to allow us as humans on this planet to have the fullest expression of who we really are. And this doesn't even necessarily, it's just something that's physical, right? Something that's physical, like a child who's enjoying playing with a puppy is going to experience that same kind of surge of living energy, just the joy of being alive, the sort of softness and innocence of experiencing embodiment. And somebody maybe who is character armored, right, might see a child playing with a puppy and experiencing this joy, and they might find it so difficult to cope with the bitter awareness of their own stuntedness that they might lash out at this child and try and shut down the innocent joy that they're witnessing, because it's almost too painful for them to bear seeing this. And this is what Reich called the emotional plague.
Right. And that is how we train children. Don't do that, don't do this, don't be loud, don't run around, don't dress this way.
Don't get dirty.
All of it.
Sure.
All of it. Yeah, don't. So that's how, you train the little nascent brain that's
Sure.
understanding, good and bad, pain and pleasure.
Sure.
That you're going to get hurt.
Punishment
if
and
you
reward.
act freely.
Yeah.
And you're going to be rewarded if you're meek.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what.
Yeah.
But I think,
That's-
as a non-practitioner, I have to say that my own understanding, and I'm opening up the conversation
Sure.
to this now, but my own understanding early on, from like adolescence, of the power of sex beyond like the physical
Sure.
pleasure, is that it liberated me, however briefly, from the bound and the bondage of the self. So
Sure.
during the time of orgasm, which for a woman is longer, luckily, so
sure.
we can actually feel it better. I was no longer as I knew myself, or as anyone knew me. I wasn't who my parents knew, or my teachers knew, or my friends knew, or this man or woman, whoever I was with knew. So it became something else. I was still an I,
Sure.
but I felt this must be what it is to be connected to the God or the greater consciousness, or because I'm not me. I don't know, this is beyond.
Right.
So that, that experience, which happens only when you go so like beyond, self and beyond the body, that's what I understand, again, as a non-professional, is like sacred sexuality, the power of sex to unite us to,
Sure, to take
the
us
divine.
take us beyond the bonds.
Right.
Sex becomes the vehicle of, divinity.
Sure. And something that liberates us from the smaller sense of self, right, to the larger
Right.
universal self.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's
So
true. And it's
you-
a beautiful way to describe it. Sure.
So you have done both tantra and Gnostic work
Sure.
on this?
And I can tell you how that came about.
Yeah.
When I was in my mid-20s, I was living in San Francisco, and I went through a very intense period of, I guess, of artistic and subconscious experimentation. And
Spiritual emergence,
yeah.
if you will.
Now I'm going to sound like a weirdo. I mean, what I was doing at the time was that I was reading a tremendous amount about Tantra, which I found to be very fascinating, right? So there are sort of these, just the bare bones version of it that I was exposed to. I think the guy's name who wrote the book was Philip Ross, and he was describing the picture that was painted for me was of a system whereby we can understand the human body as having 7 energy systems, the chakras, right? And there's a phenomenon whereby there's it's believed that there's a serpent that is sort of sleeping at the base of the human spine called the Kundalini, which literally means coiled. And this represents Shakti, which is sort of the universal
Life
feminine energy. Yeah. And that it is dreaming and it is asleep. And by virtue of its being asleep, these male and female forces are kind of separated, and we take on identities in the world, and we sort of live out this illusion of great separation, right? So through certain types of exercises and meditations, this serpent will be roused to sort of climb the spine and, sort of reunite with its other pole, thereby creating illumination. And when I read this, I was fascinated. And this is probably still drawing on my childhood experiences in Catholic school. But I was like, fascinating. So you have a male and a female figure. You have a serpent. You have the serpent climbing up something. The Hebrew word for tree is the same word as the word for spine. And then you have 7 chakras in 7 days, right? And I started to think, wow, I really am starting to believe that the story of creation and Genesis is really a kind of a perverted or distorted power play account of what I'm now reading about Tantra. So I, at the time, was this is what I did. I was reading the Bible a lot, and I started scanning and doing optical character text recognition on chunks of it and sort of cutting them apart and rearranging them sort of William S. Burroughs cut-up style to try and create what I wanted, right?
Interesting.
Because William S. Burroughs claimed that, words and images can form locks on the human brain,
Right.
which limit us into much smaller realities than the ones we're actually capable of. And as long as we remain in a universe where there's only one reality, then everything's just going to be continually running downhill into decay. And that there's another universe that's available to us with multiple realities that is informed by magic, but it's a matter of breaking these locks. So I hadn't been exposed to those theories at that time. I was like 24. I was just following this intuitively, but later when I read about that, it made sense in retrospect. So I got very, very deep into this bizarre personal journey where I was, making collages about the Garden of Eden and mashing them up with stuff about Tantra and rearranging all these words. And, it was like that movie, A Beautiful Mind. Like all 4 walls of my apartment were covered from floor to ceiling with these pictures showing this whole journey. Just how can I go back to the story and get it right? So
So it's like editing.
Yeah, so it's like editing. Like I'm going back and going back and editing.
Remix.
Yeah.
Going back and editing the genes. In a way, you know
exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah. I'm going to intercept just for a
Sure.
second. But when I was 19, to just share,
Sure.
I kind of stopped my education, which was going somewhere else, and went to Boulder, Colorado, and studied at Naropa
nice.
with Burroughs and Ginsberg.
Oh, no
And
kidding.
That's
They,
incredible.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Their advice on my, writing
Right.
changed basically everything.
Okay.
Forever, and it was magical. But I at the time, I didn't use that word. I thought it was
Sure.
editing.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just remember, because we're saying, but it's editing of the genes,
Sure.
not the signs and the words.
Or
So
editing.
it's much
Yeah,
deeper.
but it's you're almost creating, and this is something that I do in my work, is using these words as objects or almost like a hieroglyphic.
Exactly.
Because
Like
there's so
alchemy.
much more meaning in it.
So you can transform.
So you can take if you include all the variations of potential meaning that this thing has, then what you're doing is opening up a spectrum of possibilities when you align several of those together.
I think so. I mean, yeah, words
Okay,
and
so-
images and symbols are all magic.
Right, symbols are magic.
Yeah.
Yes, we should try to all,
Oh,
remember that
Yeah.
when we communicate.
every day.
Oh,
So you're in your apartment. The
Yeah.
walls are covered with
Right.
these alchemical rewritings, collages of sacred texts
sure.
from East and West,
Yeah. Mostly mostly from
Tantra
the West.
and Bible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I felt that one must be a misunderstanding of the other. And I happened to mention this to someone, and they said, "Oh, you need to check out the Gnostics." And I was like, "What's that?" And I went to a bookstore and got this book called The Gnostics by Jacques Le Carrière. And I was like, holy cannoli. Like, having been brought up in, sort of the Catholic school setting and having had these early headbutting experiences with, these authority figures.
you found the original heretics.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I surely did.
Yeah,
And,
they go way back.
And he was like, "Oh, that's my people."
It
was incredible.
It was in your genes.
Yeah, it was incredible. So I was like, wow, okay, so apparently there was not just one form of Christianity in the 3rd century. There were hundreds of different forms of Christianity. There were hundreds of different Bibles. There were many Christian groups believed in reincarnation. Many of them were ardent astrologers. Many of them seem to have various types of group or, more private, rituals that seem to be very heavily influenced by Tantra or something very much like it. A lot of, almost all of the Gnostic groups held the belief that the world that we live in is an illusion or is a type of illusion, and that the creator deity described in the Bible was actually a fallen angel who was trying to keep us trapped in this illusion, and that Jesus was actually the serpent, and he... Well, actually, this differs because the word that is used in a lot of the Gnostic scriptures, they use the words Eve and serpent and teacher interchangeably, which is like a triple pun in Arabic, Aramaic, and Hebrew. So one of the passages that I like the most in one of these scriptures, and again, this is like from the 2nd century, so it gives you an idea of how these things were diverse from the beginning. They were not monolithic, like the monolithic ideology that came later was imposed by violence and force.
By fascism,
Yeah,
which
by
is
fascism.
the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's
And
your
it-
story.
Yeah.
Fascism, Catholics, heretics.
So one of the original Gnostic myths, they describe how basically there was this fallen angel who, I mean, without getting too into it, because this is we're already at the half-hour mark. I'll just give you the real
No, that's
quick.
all right. I love the story.
So basically, there was an unknown god of some sort who was, in this story, which they largely held in common, who this unknown deity was, sort of infinite and could only see itself in every direction. This was all that existed, so it was lonely. And at some point, a female deity kind of split off and was curious and was like, well, what can I make? And sort of cast this veil over the world that she lived in. And the veil cast a shadow, and from the shadow arose this arrogant being with the face of a lion who said, behold, it is I who am God, and there's none apart from me. And his mother heard him say this and started weeping and thought, oh no, what kind of mess is this jerk going to make? And he went ahead and said, I'm going to make some beings and force them to work for me and worship me. So he made Adam.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he made Adam,
How
and
about that?
Adam was not able to stand up. He just sort of, wriggled on the ground like a worm. And this mother goddess looked down and said, oh, I'm very, it's causing me great feelings of sorrow to see what's happening. And she's like, I will send my daughter Eve to go help this man. So Eve flew down from somewhere else, somewhere so much higher above the mind can't even conceive of it, flew down to Eden and saw Adam lying there and said, arise and live, right? And Adam stands up and says, behold, I will call you Eve, since you are the mother of the living. And then this false god sees these things happen and gets very angry and is distressed because they're starting to escape his control. And he warns them, not to eat from this tree. And then there's a serpent who comes down, and the serpent is sort of identified with Eve. And they're using the language that they're using, like the serpent, the instructor, the mother.
Just for the record, the false god is Yahweh.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I read this, and I just became freaking obsessed with it, right? And I spent about 7 years.
Like, oh.
Yeah, I was like off.
You will rue the day, nuns.
Yeah, I was off to the races like 24 hours a day, like, in any theory I read, which I can relate to this in any way. I did, So it was a really, really deep opportunity to sort
But it feels to me that just, again, historically, the Gnostics cover the entire period from, like, the Orphic mysteries, which are long before Christ. We're,
That's
to, like, 900 years before Christ or 800 years. We can't be sure.
With a name like Eurydice, you ought to know, too. Right.
So we have the Orphic mysteries, and then it covers all the way to when John writes the Revelations.
Sure.
The Revelations is Gnosticism. It's still in that,
part of that genre.
It was taken, for some reason, it was accepted by the church. I don't know why, because it doesn't, fit with any of the other books.
But it does really put the fear into people, because it talks about,
But it's very, like, demonic and chaotic.
They had to have something to make all these people be afraid,
rapture.
That they could control them.
Right.
But
in any way, what I'm saying is, like, I think that there is they were much more mainstream, accepted than we understand it now, having survived 2,000 years of the Catholic Church. But up until even that time on the island of Patmos, I think that, that understanding of the world, in which things can happen all the time, gods appear, gods disappear, miracles, one gives birth to the other. That was the familiar, that was the understanding of life. And then we have the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and all of that kind of ends. And it's as if there was a moment right then in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, with all of those synods and whatnot, of extreme, oppression, and let's say the victory of the tyranny.
Sure.
And here we are now. And it's the 20th century when you were reading this in San Francisco. And now it's the 21st century, and it's the beginning of the Aquarian Age.
Sure.
And maybe there is hope that we're going to get back to that place in time and open up.
21's a good year.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can never step in the same stream twice, right? But I have questioned many times what's the source of my fascination with this. And I think... I mean, I didn't have the language to wrap around this when I was a kid, but as I got older, I was like, this is really kind of when Jung talks about the shadow side, right, or the shadow of the psyche, all of our unrealized potential, all of the things about ourselves that we could be, but, lack the courage to explore, or would rather not look at or think about and keep hidden from ourselves. So the whole phenomenon of Gnosticism, as a religious movement, I really saw this, like, this is the shadow of Christianity. Like, this is the shadow that it's casting. And so everything that has been rejected from Christianity, every outlier, every random stray thought, every road,
everything and person burned.
Yeah, anything and everything that challenges central authority but is part of the story is basically has been shunted off into this other being, really as a projection. And even the historical accounts of the Gnostics and what they did, there's a tremendous amount of projection in there, like, describing all these, outlandish, crazy things that they supposedly did. You kind of wonder, like,
who's writing these?
What people? Oh yeah, heresy hunters. And you kind of wonder, like, did they really do these things? Like, do people do these things when they're on a sincere quest, or is this just a bunch of dirty old men who are sort of angry that someone's challenging their authority, and so all the things that are lurking in the back of their brains, they're projecting and saying, "Oh, here's all the horrible things that they do. We want nothing to do with it." You know what I mean? So it strikes me there's a tremendous amount of displacement there. And like, I don't know, the beautiful thing about the shadow is it doesn't go away. It sort of stays there until it's dealt with.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know where else to go with that, but that journey took me a long way. I mean, my interest in that took me a long way.
Well, I feel, I mean, I'm not a Jungian,
Sure.
but from where I see, from where I understand it, the shadow part is more real or more authentic than the other. So we tend to think, oh, let's bring things into the light. Light is good, light is positive. But just, in the purposes of this conversation, my reading of it is that the shadow is the light. What we call the shadow is actually much more, rich and accepting, positive than, the establishment.
It's the hidden treasure of our psyches. It's
right.
the source of the gold.
Good. Yeah. Just
Yeah. What I found interesting was when you were describing the formation of, like, it came from Yaldabaoth, came from the void, right? What everything that the establishment has pushed out of itself becomes its shadow. And so from that space is going to be the accumulation of this new creature, that holds its own consciousness. That's how it's happening. And then it becomes like the solution to the problem. Everything that it rejected,
right?
Everything that the establishment rejected becomes the solution to the problems that they created.
Sure.
And that's the humbling balance.
Sure. And that's like the archetypal myth, right? Where like the hero or the heroine is for whatever reason misunderstood and rejected, and they actually have it within them to go out and find like this new information or these new resources that they'll be able to bring back after a perilous journey and heal the whole community.
Totally.
But it's almost like they have to not have an established place at the outset, or they wouldn't be impelled to leave home and take a dangerous voyage and
right. So
come back.
It's always the misfit.
Yeah.
It's rarely the young heir to the throne.
No.
Yeah, that's right.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing, in the alternate creation stories that you shared with us, the woman is much more empowered than in the ones that we were raised on. So it is important to remember that the establishment has demonized and marginalized women because they are the generators of life, or because they're sex, or I don't know why else, but this is like one of the most obvious reasons in my opinion. And I have two examples from my own, personal culture. Hypatia in Alexandria, who was, martyred just because she was a scientist and a woman scientist. And of course, Sappho, who gave my island its alternate meaning. So, when I tell people I'm a lesbian, they only understand sex with women. They have no idea there is even an island where I was born.
You're like, no, actually, like I would be a Miamian. She is a lesbian.
Yeah, and but it's, to me, this is like the ultimate example of the power of the establishment or patriarchy or whatever you want to call it, the system, to control the language and control the meaning, and therefore control our understanding of things, and limit our understanding of things.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they don't even know if she was, gay or straight or bi, or, she had a daughter, she had a husband, she was exiled for political reasons, came back. She wrote songs, about women from the point of view of the men. She was very good with, logos, which is supposed to be a male territory. Women weren't supposed to have, open schools for girls or write or become famous for their writing. But it was only the Christian fathers, the post-Gnostic Christian authorities that, turned her into this, pervert
Yeah.
and turned her toponym, because she was known as Sappho of Lesbos, Sappho the lesbian, and somehow they turned that into, a curse or a, a immoral, epithet, judgment.
One of their favorite things to do.
And
This
she
was
was
also-
banned. Her writing
They
was
actually-
banned. So 90% of her writing is gone. We have only bits and pieces.
That's because
that are,
they burned
you know,
all the books.
They burned all the books. So whatever we I think we have only one poem intact because it was copied by some Roman writer and that survived. But otherwise everything has been found recently, meaning the 20th century even.
Sure.
In the desert in Egypt and other places that have survived because it's so dry.
Sure, like
And
Nag
they were they were used, the papyri were used to wrap fish in the market. So, to just even as an example, to take this, this woman wrote some love poems.
Sure.
And what the church authorities and,
yeah.
the patriarchy authorities did to that.
Because they didn't want other women doing that. They're like, oh dear God. Oh
It's
dear God.
mind-blowing.
Sure.
So if you say, okay, this is an example. If you apply that to our overall understanding of right, wrong, history,
And
we don't know
it's been-
anything.
it's been
Yeah, if
so
you can
skewed.
control the past, you can control the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now there's a writer named Peter Carroll who talks about how societies go through different stages from animism to polytheism to monotheism to atheism, and then it begins again. Animism.
I'm looking
polytheism.
forward to animism.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
me
really
too.
I see it that way.
I'm all about it.
This is, I mean, I see it. We're now reapproaching animism
Yeah.
because we've run to I feel the logical end of what we've become. So I mean, I'm a web nerd, right? And I worked professionally for many years as a web developer, and it's fascinating. It's wonderful, and technology is fantastic. But I mean, I remember going to Peru. I went to the Peruvian Amazon a number of years ago to do ayahuasca ceremony for a couple of weeks, and coming back to the Bay Area and landing in the airport and just seeing, everyone in the airport with their black turtlenecks, frantically getting plugged back into their
Oh yeah, because
Bluetooth
God
and
forbid.
everything and their smartphones. And I was like, holy moly, it's like an insect hive. This is so detached from.
Well, that's the mecca of high tech,
Yeah.
big tech.
Oh yeah.
But that to me, I mean, it's the degree to which as a species right now we're sort of marinated in this sort of disembodied, disassociated experience of being constantly wired into cell phones or smartphones, whatever. This is an exacerbation of the mind-body split, right? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
something that's distancing us from ourselves and what and who we really are.
Yes.
Yes.
And I can say that, and the second I walk out of here, I'll be like, "Oh, did anyone text me?" But it's still
Yeah, but
it's still there.
There's also there's a Gnostic myth about the fragmentation of Sophia,
Oh, sure.
and I think that is it's a really beautiful portrait of where we are, what the thing that we're
The fragmentation
experiencing.
of wisdom, of knowledge.
Yes,
Sure, yeah.
And it's the way that I see things is that each one of us is a chromosome in the cosmic body, and that we have certain jobs that we need to do or that do well, and if we work in union, then the function of the cosmic body, works together. The way we act, the way we behave now towards each other, is we're just hitting ourselves in the face all the time and disrespecting ourselves, because for the way that we wage war on each other, and the way that we exist in this fragmented, alienated
Digital
place of
consciousness.
yeah.
Sure.
And I think I was referencing it so you could tell the story.
Thanks. Yeah,
not
I got
so
it.
I could.
Yeah,
So
no, I
please
understand.
take over anytime you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah, well, my question is, so you are doing ayahuasca, you're still in San Francisco. What
Right.
brings you to Miami?
Oh, It's a long story.
Oh,
I really got. And we have like 10
That's
minutes,
all right.
right?
That's okay.
I just hit the point where, I was reading articles about 30 years old and over the hill in Silicon Valley, and I'm 48, and I was like, oh my God, I've had a really good run, but at the time, everyone I knew, I just was burned out. I was burned out on a lot of dimensions of my life. You know what I mean? And my little sister lives here in Miami, and plus I'm involved in Afro-Caribbean traditional religions, and a lot of my friends who practice those things are here too. And so I thought, well, I could be closer to the source and keep up on that. And time for a change.
And how do you get ordained as a Gnostic bishop?
A friend of mine was visiting me from Italy, and he
holds the lineage.
Yeah, he holds the lineage, and he took me to the beach, and this is something we did at 3 a.m. And
Wow.
It was very beautiful. I mean, he just did a whole baptism on me by moonlight, and we left, and we were walking back up Ocean Avenue, and Ocean Drive.
He'll get it eventually.
And it was interesting. We walked past a homeless guy who was sort of weaving little things out of.
Yeah, I know
palm
the guy.
fronds.
I know
Yeah.
the guy. Yeah, I always bought his flowers and his little palm creations.
And Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer, talked a lot about what he called the palm garden, the palm tree garden, as being sort of this like mystical locus of, cosmic unity that we as humans have access to. Okay, good. Now I'm teeing myself up for something else, which is fine. And so I was sort of wandering back from the beach, wondering, what did I just experience? What was the value of this? And we walked past this guy, and he just looked at me, and he wove a rose on the spot out of dried palm leaves and showed me how you could twist the stem to open or close it, which I took to be almost like the heart opening and closing. And he said, I will give this to you if you will do, 3 good deeds without hope of recompense. And I just suddenly got a chill and looked at my friend, and I was like, oh, holy crow, that really was something. Like, you actually transmitted something to me, because now I'm getting an immediate real-world feedback on it. And speaking of the fragmentation of the soul and technology and all that sort of thing, and Gnosticism, and what does that all mean to me, and why did I, go there, right? Is because, to me, that always stood as an example of, people have the right to tell their own stories. People have the right to find metaphors that work for them, and people have the right to tell the truth of their experience, whatever diverse forms that might take. Every individual has their own, whether they're male or female or gay or straight or whatever they might be, they have their own wisdom, they have their own genius, and they have their own story to tell, and the telling and retelling of the stories of our lives and how we understand our own journey is, I believe that's just part of what heals us, and it's part of how we shine our light at each other.
That's right.
And that's what I admired so deeply about the Gnostics, that they did this in the face of tremendous opposition, and yet they did it.
Yeah.
And when I started doing hypnosis training and life coaching training, I sort of discovered this is basically what I learned, is that life coaching I'll use as an example. It's not about giving advice, right? It's about recognizing it and acknowledging that any person you talk to is their own universe and has had their own experience and actually has like a very deep wisdom whose roots travel so much further beyond anything the mind can conceive, into the same infinite source that we all share. So very often it's simply a matter of guiding them to where they can relax and sink into that and sort of find their own wisdom, because they already have the solutions to all their own problems and the answers to all their own questions. And I'll tell you a story, which is sort of an anecdote about a dimension of this. So I had a hypnosis client a year or so ago who her goal was to lose weight, and okay, that's a sort of a standard thing. The subconscious can't ever have a vacuum. So if you remove one habit, you find a healthier habit, and you sort of layer in the suggestion, help them change their own behavior. So I met this woman, And my immediate thought to myself was like, holy cannoli. If you lost, you already look like Linda Hamilton in the Terminator, like 1 more ounce of fat, and you're would not be good for you. This is not what you need. So what do you really need? Why are you here? I mean, this is my own internal dialogue. I didn't voice it
of course,
abrasive way, obviously. So, long story short, it simply turned out that this woman was applying for modeling jobs in Miami, but because she was a mere, 5'10", and not 6 feet tall, was considered to be non-suitable as a model, and was getting very discouraged and thought, well, I must need to lose more weight. And so I talked with her for a little bit, and it was, what do you really want to do? And she was like, well, I want to move to New York City and do acting workshops and become an actress. That's my real passion. Okay. Why haven't you done that yet? Well, I'm frightened. I'm just here on a green card, and maybe my parents won't believe in me or will doubt me. And I guess I'm still amazed by this story, or I wouldn't be telling it again, because I've told it hundreds of times, and it still kind of amazes me every time. I led her through an exercise where I said, did an induction, went to a trance. Let's just say that you're already in New York. You've taken this enormous leap of faith. You've overcome your fear. You're now living in New York City. I don't know what neighborhood, maybe Brooklyn, maybe Staten Island, maybe the Bronx, maybe Queens, maybe Manhattan. You have a cute apartment somewhere. There's a lamp on a desk. You have friends that you see. You have people that you recognize when you get a bagel in the morning. What do they look like? Tell me about them. Like, who's in these acting workshops with you? Are you having fun? Like, how do these people support themselves? How do you support yourself? Are you still a waitress? And we talked through the whole thing, and it was so incredibly vivid. And she was just so excited and happy about, like, wow, my new life in New York is fantastic. I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. This is the best decision I've ever made. Do you ever talk to your parents on the phone? Oh, my God, they're thrilled to death. They're over the moon. They're so proud of me. So we really went through everything until we captured every detail and knew for a fact this was true. This is real. This is happening, and you're experiencing it now. This is a real future. So then we just sort of rewound. Okay, let's come back to the present time. You've already been there. You've already experienced this. Remember how you got here. If there's any little steps you took, or, you want to leave any breadcrumbs, feel free to do so. And we came back to the present time, and she woke up and came out of the trance. And that was it. I mean, I only worked with this client one time, and then she wrote me like a month later and said, holy, I'm living in New York. This is the greatest decision I've ever made in my life. It's exactly like I saw in my head. And that all came from her. All that came from her. The knowledge, the detail of the new life that she had, of the steps that she had to take there, of the emotional motivation, everything. All the courage, all the wisdom, everything, this all came from inside of her. So all she needed was someone to create a space for that to spread into and tell her story. And then she was able to make her own story real. And then the reality of the real world that we live in now just was a very small step from there to catch up. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exactly why, that's just, perfect kind of closure.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what we're doing here. That's why we have this podcast with Speak Sex. It's just, a way to put in words, and, alchemical words, right? Put in words what you want to be, and, put in words what felt like it was unspeakable before, or frightening, or impossible to achieve. And then once you visualize it, and you've said it, and you've heard other people say it, and you've heard other people articulate it without that fear, because it's just the words, and the words create a vision, create a world, create a reality, right? And that's how we change our consciousness. Your client changed her consciousness just by speaking her desire, like in full detail.
She grew the wings that she needed.
Yeah,
right. And then when you speak your way through it, you overcome the fear. Like it's easier. There's no space for the fear anymore.
It's easier to engage the action that actually.
Yeah, exactly. You can then do it, and I feel that. I'm kind of emphasizing the sex in the speaking sex, because I feel that that's a crack in the wall, because I feel that that's something that has not been like overprescribed by the system.
No,
so
because
it's a
that
way
would lead to too much
in,
liberation.
and we all, we all have sexual need, but it's something that we don't really all talk about. So
No.
you know, it's still kind of like
No, as a matter of
uncharted
fact,
territory.
It's even applauded when you abstain or if you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like girls aren't guys grow up having enough jokes and conversations with their buddies about masturbation. Girls are never
Oh,
encouraged.
yeah, we
or
have to
taught.
have an episode about that.
Yeah, we do.
I mostly talked about mysticism. I hope that's all right.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh no, I love it. I loved it, and the little digital aside is very very important. How our digital life is altering our consciousness. Not just our sexual experience, but also our consciousness. That's worthy of another.
Oh, there's a lot of
conversation.
therapists now
Well,
are
there's-
increasingly having to do exercises to bridge young men from being overly attached to animation, to cartoons.
Oh, to real people. Yeah, I've done some.
Or
To
games.
real people.
Or games.
Yeah.
Video games. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they have
Wow.
relationship. Yeah, they make silicone brides for them. It's really strange,
Indeed.
because there has to be an action that's involved in order to change. Words and action, but it starts with words.
Yeah, it starts with words. So I encourage you all to speak your dreams, your desires. Turn your fears into positive words. That's the lesson of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming, Alex.
Thank you so much
for
for
the
having me.
wisdom.
Yeah.
Come back. And thank you for listening to this episode of Speak Sex.
Sure. Would you mind, Alex? Could you tell me your website where people could find you, please?
Oh, sure. It's my website is Innergenius, and it's not .com. It's INNERGENI.US. So
Yeah, we'll put it on the
cool.
on
Thank
the
you.
podcast. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eurydice.